Good day. They're supposed to show a video, so let's wait a little bit.
Yung magbigay na sila ng sapat na sahod dito sa Pilipinas kasi mahirap maging mang ibang bansa.
Kung sana yung gobyerno natin makapag-isip na i-utilize nila kami sa trabaho ng oil and gas, may potential po ang Pilipinas. Yung sinasabi nilang Scarborough Shoal, yung Benham Rice, kung pwede nating utilize yung mga kuan doon. At kami yung kukunin nila, maraming manggagaling pong mga tao sa oil and gas na Pilipino.
Again, good day to all, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Secretary Pernia, I am pleased to present to you the country's recent economic performance and outlook, as well as the Duterte administration's Medium-Term Development Plan 2017-2022, focusing on our strategies for infrastructure development as one of the foundations for sustained economic growth. Okay. So next slide. First, let me present our economic performance in recent years. In 2016, we've seen our economy growing at a brisk rate of 6.9% from 5.9% in 2015. This is on the high end of the government's target of 6 to 7% growth rate for the year. And this makes the Philippines as one of the fastest, if not the fastest, rising economies in Asia today, faster than China, which grew by 6.7%, and Vietnam, which grew by 6.2%. This growth performance also brings the 7-year moving average of real GDP growth rate to 6.3%, the highest since 1978. Next slide. Now, this table details the sources of growth, or where exactly growth is coming from. On the supply side or production side, growth in the services sector improved to 7.4%, and industry grew by 8.4% last year. However, agricultural growth was a letdown, and you can see that in the first and second quarter. It recovered in the third quarter, but it reverted to negative territory in the fourth quarter, and for the whole of 2016, it's negative because the country until now is reeling from the effects of typhoons Karen and Lawin. If not for these typhoons, real GDP growth could have hit closer to 7% in 2016, as we had originally hoped. Domestic demand continued to fuel growth throughout 2016. A robust expansion in investments, growing 25.2% in 2016 was seen. Public investment in infrastructure remains strong, with public construction growing by 28%. Private consumption grew by 7% in 2016, and all this is attributed to high consumer confidence, which, by the way, is continuing, modest inflation and interest rates, and improving labor market conditions. External demand, as you can see from the exports figures, expanded by 10.7%, with merchandise exports rising by 9.2%, and exports of services maintaining its double-digit growth of 6.2%. Growth in imports accelerated by 8.5%, and this reflects higher purchases of capital and durable goods, which supports our build strategy. And, of course, sustainable and inclusive growth. Next slide. Now, let's look at the transformation in the economy. And this figure shows that the composition of our economic growth on the demand or spending side is worth noting because, for one, we observe the increasing contribution of investments, the orange shade. And for the whole of 2016, investment as a share of GDP has reached 24% from 19% in 2009. On the production side, on the right portion, this resurgence of industry, especially manufacturing, the blue shade, implies that the quality of growth is improving. Let me add that in recent years, the total factor productivity growth in the Philippines has been the fastest in ASEAN at 2.3%. Likewise, capital efficiency the incremental capital output ratio has been improving. We believe that the process of structural transformation of the economy is taking place, which is crucial to sustaining growth and generating more stable quality jobs. Now, next slide. Let's look at the average regional shares in GDP. So looking across regions, we can see that the country's GDP in recent years remains concentrated in the mega Manila regions, namely the National Capital Region, the Calabarzon region or Region 4A, and the Central Luzon region or Region 3, which collectively accounted for about 62% of total GDP for the period 2020 to 2015. And we're gonna change that through more connectivity enhancing infrastructure by connecting the other regions to the growth centers. Okay, next slide. Now, the upbeat view on the Philippine economy is shared by private sector institutions and international organizations. As you can see from this table, the growth projections are converging to a median of 6.5% this year and also next year, and mean of 6.5%. Now, next slide. The expected drivers of growth. On the demand side, we anticipate that it will continue to be household consumption, pushed by remittance inflows, better employment prospects, strong consumer confidence, and maintained low inflation, low interest rate. And then, of course, government spending. You'll hear more about that later from Secretary Jokno. And then investment. We are implementing a manufacturing resurgence program. Then faster implementation of PPPs, faster than what the last administration did, and quicker execution of major public infrastructure projects, exports of services, IT business process management, and tourism. On the supply side or on the production side, we expect and we intend to have a resurgence of agriculture and fishery. We plan to strengthen our BIFAR, the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. And the Department of Trade and Industry is leading a transition to the second phase of the Manufacturing Resurgence Program. There will be a boost in construction industry from government spending, an aggressive government spending for infrastructure. And we expect an influx of inbound tourists. We hope to recover, and then expansion in retail trade and the continuing growth of the IT BPM sector. Now, recent uncertainties. Notwithstanding the positive outlook, we remain vigilant and well-positioned against the downside risks to growth. So we recognize this risk, the fragile growth in the Japan, in the advanced economies, Japan and the European Union, slowdown in large emerging economies, particularly China, uncertain policy shifts in the US, gradually being protectionist, and then asynchronous monetary policies in the world's major economies, greater volatility in capital flows, oil price volatility and geopolitical risks. But these are well-known risks, and we can well anticipate them. On the domestic risks, we have, again, weather disturbances year in, year out, we have that. And then logistics bottlenecks, which the government is already addressing, and delays in government infrastructure and reconstruction projects, and we really intend to get serious about this. The closure of mines, it's a huge challenge. Policy inconsistencies, we rely on the economic managers to push for this, and socio-political uncertainties. And we are pursuing this partly through the peace talks, the peace negotiation process, and I'm glad to be part of it. Now, next slide. Anchored on the country's long-term vision, or the Ambition Natin 2040, and the President's 10-point socioeconomic agenda, the next slides provide a brief discussion on the strategic framework of the Philippine Development Plan 2017-2022, our economic blueprint. Next slide. Okay, this snapshot shows you first, the objective. The objective is that by the end of 2022, more Filipinos will be closer to achieving our ambition, our long-term vision for a matatag, maginhawa, at panatag na buhay. The Philippine Development Plan will aim to lay down a solid foundation for more inclusive growth, a high-trust society and resilient society, and a globally competitive knowledge economy. So the strategies fall under the three major pillars of malasakit, enhancing the social fabric, pagbabago, inequality, reducing transformation, at patuloy na pag-unlad, increasing growth potential. In enhancing the social fabric, the aim is to regain people's trust in public institutions and cultivate trust in fellow Filipinos. Chapter 5 of the Philippine Development Plan talks about public offices being people-centered, efficient, and clean, while administration of justice will be swift and fair, and that's in Chapter 6. Filipinos will be more aware of and will learn to value the country's diverse cultures and shared heritage. That's in Chapter 7. Inequality reducing transformation or pagbabago in that pillar. For each economic sector, this means more opportunities for growth of output and income. Lagging subsectors and economic groups like small farmers and fisher folks, medium and small-scale enterprises will benefit from this, and those are discussed in Chapters 8 and 9 of the PDP. Individuals and people groups will have more options to develop their full potential, that's in Chapter 10, and vulnerability of individuals will be reduced, that's discussed in Chapter 11. Communities will be more resilient in line with the new urban agenda of integrated neighborhoods and sustainable communities, that's in Chapter 12. Increasing potential growth. We aim to do this by further enhancing or further reaching for and harvesting the demographic dividend that's discussed in Chapter 13. Also, the foundations for a knowledge economy is needed, given that a vibrant knowledge economy will propel the country on a higher growth path since it produces higher value output and is more resilient to geoclimatic shocks. That's discussed in Chapter 14. Enabling and supportive economic environment. More inclusive growth will be achieved with an enabling and supportive economic environment through maintaining macroeconomic stability. Fiscal prudence will be observed, strategic trade policy will be implemented, that's in Chapter 15. Policies, laws, and regulations will be reviewed and measures will be undertaken to enhance market competition, that's in Chapter 16. The foundations for sustainable development, that's the underpinning pillar, and it will be ensured by pursuing strategies related to national security against internal and external threats. That's in Chapter 17. At the same time, territorial integrity and sovereignty will be upheld and protected, and that's discussed in Chapter 18. Chapter 19 talks about infrastructure. So the next 6 years will be characterized as the golden age of infrastructure. Related to that, maintaining the ecological integrity, and that's in Chapter 20. An important partner of development is the environment and natural resources sector. That's why we have to formulate strategies for that also. Migration and development are also discussed, and the PDP gives deliberate attention to the special circumstances of overseas Filipinos and their families. For more details, please visit the NEDA website. An electronic copy is available for download. Next slide. Okay, as I mentioned in the previous slide, one of the foundations for a sustained economic development is infrastructure development. As a bedrock strategy, it will support all three pillars of the PDP, malasakit, pagbabago, at patuloy na pag-unlad. Characterized as the golden age of infrastructure in the Philippines, the implementation of the country's medium-term infrastructure program constitutes policy reforms, programs, and projects designed to accelerate infrastructure development. Now, there's also a discussion of national spatial strategy in the Philippine Development Plan. Pursuant to the realization of inclusive development, the plan espouses this NSS to set the direction of future growth. We recognize population, geography, and the role of cities as engines of economic growth. We therefore will design infrastructure that will provide efficient connectivity and create networks of urban and rural communities consistent with our long-term vision. Next slide. So what are the component strategies? Firstly, the National Spatial Strategy seeks to build on the efficiencies and maximize the benefits of scale and agglomeration economies. It aims to decongest NCR, or the National Capital Region, or Metro Manila, and direct growth to key centers throughout the country. Next slide. The second component strategy is to connect the settlements to form an efficient network. This means improving linkages among settlements and key production areas by connecting rural areas to growth centers or strengthening urban-rural linkages. Next slide. Lastly, the National Spatial Strategy seeks to make vulnerability reduction an integral part of development. And NEDA, as vice chair, one of the vice chairs of the National Disaster Risk and Reduction Management Council, is actively helping implement this strategy. So this strategy involves instituting prevention and mitigation measures to reduce the impact of natural disasters on the communities. Now, we also have the 3-year rolling infrastructure program. There is, by the way, a medium-term public investment program, which will be an accompanying document for the PDP. Now, we have formulated the 3-year rolling infrastructure program, and this is a subset of the larger PIP. For fiscal year 2018 to 2020, we anticipate to have an investment program of 14.88 billion pesos. In dollar terms, that's roughly $80 billion. So the golden age of infrastructure in the Philippines has begun and is currently implemented through the massive infrastructure spending covering transport, water resources sector, energy, information and communication technology, social infrastructure like education facilities and housing, and solid waste. Part of the policy reforms is to increase expenditure efficiency by enhancing the linkage of planning, programming, and budgeting processes of the government. This trip contains nationally funded infrastructure programs and projects based on the synchronized planning, budgeting, and programming processes. The trip will be implemented and updated to optimize the use of agency budget allocations towards addressing underspending, expenditure realignments, and cost overruns. Moreover, policies to improve and streamline government approval processes for major public investment projects have already been put in place. The country is also exploring hybrid financing arrangements for some of the projects. By the way, I don't have it in my slides, but I was informed that some people are wondering about the investment program being quite Luzon-centric. I have the regional breakdown with me, and based on the amounts, well, yes, the National Capital Region gets most of the investments in terms of amount. It's number 1. But the second is Region 11, or the Davao region, and the third is ARMM. But in terms of number of projects, the first is ARRM, or the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, and the NCR is only second, and then third is Region 2. Okay, next slide. Public-private partnership projects. Public spending will be complemented by private investments in public infrastructure. As of March 28, 2017, as you can see from the figures, a total of 15 national projects worth 310.51 billion pesos are already under implementation, and another 40 projects are in the pipeline. 9 projects undergoing various stages of procurement, 2 projects undergoing ICC approval, or Investment Coordination Committee approval, and NEDA board approval, NEDA board headed by the President. 8 projects are for agency evaluation, and 21 projects are for conceptualization. So with the right policies, further improvements in productivity, and greater participation in reforms, we can be an upper middle income by 2022, with growth